Welcome back, wanderers of the Wasteland. Today's confession comes from deep within the ruins, a testimony about the factions that claim they're rebuilding civilization and the dark truth about what they're really constructing. We're diving into one of the most disturbing patterns in the Fallout universe, how every major faction with real power is trying to resurrect the exact systems that ended the world in the first place. From the Enclave's genetic fascism to the Institute's scientific tyranny, from the Brotherhood's technological hoarding to Caesar's brutal empire, they're all building tomorrow out of yesterday's corpses. Let's begin this confession from the Wasteland. I've walked through the ashes of civilization long enough to recognize a pattern. Every banner raised over these ruins carries the stench of the same rot that turned the world to glass. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I've seen, what I've learned, and what I need to tell you before one of them finds me. They call themselves saviors, rebuilders, the inheritors of tomorrow. The Brotherhood of Steel, Caesar's Legion, the Institute, the Enclave, even Mr. House himself, locked in his tower of steel and silicon. They all promise a future, but I've seen their blueprints, and they're all just photocopies of yesterday's suicide note. Hope isn't dying in the Wasteland because of radiation or raiders. It's being murdered by men in power armor who think they can resurrect the corpse of America and call it progress. I used to believe the factions fighting over the Wasteland represented different paths forward, different philosophies, different methods, but all pointed toward rebuilding something better than what came before. I was naive, I was stupid, and I almost died for that stupidity. It took me 3 years of walking between their camps, 3 years of watching their soldiers march and their leaders speak to understand the truth. They're not building forward. They're walking backward with their eyes closed, stumbling toward the same cliff that humanity already fell off once before. Let me tell you how I learned this. Let me tell you what they don't want you to know. It started in the Commonwealth, 5 years after I crawled out of Vault 111. The Enclave appeared in my settlement like angels in advanced power armor, speaking of restoration and purity with voices amplified through helmet speakers. They had vertibirds, energy weapons, resources we could only dream of. They offered protection, medicine, order. All we had to do was submit to genetic screening. For your own safety, the officer said. His voice was warm, almost fatherly. We need to ensure the purity of the new America. I'd seen the documents in their oil rig years before it sank beneath the Pacific. I'd read the files during a supply run that went sideways, forced me to hide in what used to be a Poseidon energy facility. They thought the computers were wiped. They were wrong. I saw the names, the dates, the authorizations. The Enclave wasn't just descended from pre-war America. They were the same government officials who chose nuclear war over diplomacy, the same shadow state that ran human experiments before the bombs fell, the same corporate military alliance that weaponized the FEV virus and decided that Vault experiments mattered more than human lives. When I confronted that Enclave officer about their purity doctrine, he didn't even blink. He casually explained they planned to use modified FEV to kill everyone who'd been exposed to radiation, which meant everyone except them. The Wasteland is contaminated, he said, like he was discussing crop rotation. A clean slate requires removing the stains first. We're not monsters, we're surgeons removing a tumor. The irony struck me like a bullet through the chest. The faction claiming to represent pure humanity was founded by the same shadow government that ran Vault experiments, weaponized viruses, and chose corporate profit over survival. They survived because they knew the war was coming. They helped start it, and now they wanted to finish what the bombs began. I watched them exterminate a settlement of peaceful traders 2 weeks later. Genetic screening showed mutation. These people's only crime was surviving the apocalypse the Enclave's predecessors caused. Men, women, children, executed systematically, efficiently. The officer gave the order between bites of a pre-war ration bar. Acceptable losses, he logged in his report. 73 contaminated specimens neutralized. That's when I understood. They weren't trying to save humanity. They were trying to preserve a fantasy of pre-war America by murdering everyone who didn't fit their definition of pure. They were trying to rebuild the exact same government that ended the world, minus the people they deemed unworthy. I ran. I made it to the Commonwealth. That's where I found the Institute. At first, I thought I'd found something different, something better. The Institute sent a synth to infiltrate my new community, wearing the face of a man they'd kidnapped from his family and replaced like he was defective machinery. The synth didn't even know it wasn't human until it malfunctioned. When I finally made it into the Institute's underground facility, following a trail of clues and dead railroad agents, I was horrified by the sterile perfection. They'd recreated pre-war scientific hubris down to the fluorescent lighting and ethical blindness. Everything was white and clean and empty of conscience. A scientist there, Dr. Syverson, proudly showed me their FEV research lab. Showed me, like I'd be impressed, like I'd understand. They'd been dumping super mutants on the Commonwealth like toxic waste, calling it discontinued experiments. Decades of kidnapping surface dwellers, exposing them to the virus, watching them transform into monsters, and then teleporting them back to the surface because they were discarded test subjects. The early trials were necessary, Dr. Syverson explained, pulling up terminal records. We needed to understand the virus to perfect our synthetic biology. The super mutants were an unfortunate byproduct. Unfortunate byproduct. That's what he called a century of horror unleashed on innocent people. They showed me Edgar Swan's notes, an institute worker who stole cigarettes and got volunteered for FEV experimentation. His logs chronicled his transformation from man to monster, fully aware the entire time, watching his mind dissolve while the institute scientists took notes. When his mutation became unstable, they dumped him in Boston Common like garbage. I found thousands of records like his. Thousands. The Institute's director, Father, explained their vision with the detached logic of a man who'd never seen the sun. They would redefine mankind by treating surface dwellers as an inferior subspecies. They'd perfected Gen 3 synths using a kidnapped infant's DNA because his was pure, untouched by radiation. They'd used a century of FEV experiments on kidnapped Commonwealth citizens to figure out how to build synthetic humans. I realized the Institute wasn't just continuing pre-war science's mistakes. They'd perfected them, adding 2 centuries of isolation and superiority complex to the recipe. They were so convinced of their own enlightenment that they couldn't see they'd become exactly what the Enclave was, just with a different aesthetic. Both factions experimented on humans. Both factions believed they were humanity's last hope. Both factions measured human worth by genetic purity, whether radiation exposure or synthetic origin. Then, the Brotherhood of Steel rolled into the Commonwealth on their airship. I felt hope for the first time in months. Finally, someone with the firepower and organization to make a real difference. Someone who opposed both the Enclave and the Institute. Elder Maxon stood on the deck of the Pridwin and gave a speech about protecting humanity from itself. But their first act was demanding our crops, our technology, our autonomy, all in the name of protecting us from ourselves. A knight pulled a plasma rifle from a trader's hands and smashed his stall when he protested, then gave him a week's rations and called it compensation for dangerous materials. Elder Maxon's speeches about controlling dangerous technology rang hollow when I realized they were hoarding the same weapons and knowledge that made the Great War possible. They weren't trying to help humanity move forward. They were trying to prevent everyone else from reaching the technological heights that had literally ended civilization. They'd become gatekeepers of the apocalypse. Their power armor bore the symbols of the pre-war military, the same military that ran Mariposa Base, that created the FEV, that built the weapons that turned cities into craters of radioactive glass. Roger Maxon founded the Brotherhood after discovering the FEV experiments at Mariposa, disgusted by the government's inhumanity. But somewhere along the way, his descendants forgot the lesson. They started hoarding tech instead of sharing it. They started demanding tribute instead of offering help. The The Brotherhood wasn't trying to prevent another apocalypse, they were trying to monopolize it. I headed west to the Mojave. Maybe things were different there. Maybe the other factions had learned something. Caesar's legion crucified an entire town just beyond the Colorado River. When I asked a legionnaire why, he quoted some distorted version of Roman philosophy he didn't understand, words his Caesar had taught him. I'd read about Rome in the old Mormon fort's library, back when the followers still operated there. Caesar wasn't recreating Rome's civilization, he was cosplaying its worst atrocities and calling it cultural synthesis. Edward Sallow, the man who became Caesar, learned about history from the followers of the apocalypse and used that education to enslave 86 tribes. The legion's camps were filled with men who didn't even know they were imitating a dead empire. They thought Caesar invented everything from Latin to crucifixion. He'd hidden the books, hidden the truth, and built himself into a god through the ignorance of his followers. Caesar himself admitted his endgame when I finally made it to Fortification Hill. Conquer the NCR, absorb Vegas, create a Pax Romana through totalitarian homogeneity. He was trying to prevent humanity from fracturing by crushing every unique culture into dust. His vision of the future was one language, one culture, one truth. All his. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, he explained, tapping his temple. The NCR is corrupt democracy. My legion is totalitarian order. From their conflict will emerge something greater. But I'd seen his legion. I'd watched them burn libraries, destroy art, erase entire cultures. Caesar wasn't trying to create something new. He was trying to remake humanity in his own image through violence and slavery, using philosophy he barely understood to justify atrocities. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you gets darker. Mr. House invited me to the Lucky 38 after I helped him recover the platinum chip. I met a man who'd been alive before the bombs, a pre-war billionaire still playing with human lives like they're poker chips at his casino tables. He showed me his plans for the future with the enthusiasm of a corporate presentation, graphs, projections, probability matrices, 50 years to space colonization, he promised, all funded by New Vegas casinos, all controlled by him, forever. I predicted the war, he told me, gesturing to his screens. I saved this city. I built an empire from mathematics and vision. Democracy failed. Republics crumble. But an autocrat, a true technological visionary with immortality and absolute control, that's humanity's future. When I asked about the people in Freeside dying of starvation outside his walls, House dismissed them as temporary inefficiencies in the transition to prosperity. He actually used those words, temporary inefficiencies, human beings reduced to variables in an equation he'd already solved in his favor. I realized Mr. House wasn't trying to save humanity. He was trying to rebuild his corporate empire with himself as the eternal CEO, and everyone else as either employees or expendable resources. His vision of the future looked exactly like the pre-war world: autocratic control, vast wealth inequality, and the consolidation of power in the hands of one visionary billionaire. The same system that led to the resource wars, the same greed that made nuclear annihilation preferable to sharing. House had lived through the old world. He'd seen it destroy itself, and his grand plan was to rebuild it exactly the same way, just with him in charge this time. That's when I started to see the pattern clearly. The Enclave wanted to restore pre-war America's government structure, the same shadow state that caused the war. The Institute wanted to continue pre-war scientific hubris, the same unchecked experimentation that created super mutants and weaponized plagues. The Brotherhood wanted to control technology, the same hoarding of knowledge and weapons that made the Great War possible. Caesar wanted to build an empire using the same conquest and slavery that collapsed Rome. Mr. House wanted corporate autocracy, the same wealth consolidation that drove humanity to nuclear war over resources. Every major faction with real power was trying to resurrect some version of the old world's cancers. I started asking questions, started comparing notes with travelers, traders, people who'd been everywhere and seen everything. The pattern held everywhere I looked. The new California Republic, the faction most people thought represented actual democracy and progress, was turning into pre-war America politically. Bureaucratic corruption, expansionist imperialism, treating smaller communities as resources to extract rather than people to serve. They weren't quite as bad as the others, but I watched them tax farmers into poverty while senators got fat off bribes and shady sands. I saw NCR troops gun down Great Khan raiders, then burn their camp, including the children, because they might grow up to be raiders too. President Kimball's policies looked suspiciously like Manifest Destiny with a different flag. "We're bringing civilization," the Rangers said, while forcing towns to join the Republic or lose NCR protection. Protection from what? Often from the raiders and problems the NCR's expansion created in the first place. The pattern was everywhere once I knew to look for it. But then I found the followers of the apocalypse in the old Mormon fort, and for the first time, someone told me they were studying the old world to avoid repeating its mistakes. Julie Farkas explained their mission while stitching up a chem addict who couldn't pay. "We're not trying to rebuild America. America built the bombs that destroyed itself. We're trying to learn what went wrong so we don't do it again." The followers taught me to read pre-war history, not as a blueprint, but as a warning label. Each chapter a different flavor of systemic failure. They showed me documents from before the war, corporate memos prioritizing profit over sustainable energy research, government files detailing how they chose to experiment on vault dwellers rather than protect them, military reports treating nuclear weapons as acceptable first strike options. "Look at this," Arcade Gannon said, showing me a pre-war file. He was an Enclave remnant who joined the followers after seeing what his father's organization really was. Every faction with real power is trying to resurrect some version of the old world's cancers. The Enclave wants the government back. The Brotherhood wants military control back. Caesar wants empire back. House wants corporate oligarchy back. They're all trying to hit undo on the apocalypse. But the followers understood something crucial. You can't fix a broken system by rebuilding it exactly the same way. The old world ended for a reason. Julie told me one night after we'd spent 14 hours treating wounded from a Legion raid. It wasn't just the war. The war was a symptom. The disease was the systems themselves, the belief that some people matter more than others, that power should concentrate in the hands of the few, that resources should be hoarded instead of shared, that technology exists to dominate rather than liberate. I started traveling more deliberately after that, looking for other factions that understood this truth. The railroad in the Commonwealth operated in shadows, hiding synths from the Institute. Their entire philosophy was revolutionary. In its simplicity, individual consciousness matters more than systemic control. They believed that if something could think, feel, choose, it deserved freedom, not because of genetics or purity or usefulness, but because consciousness itself was sacred. The Institute treats synths as property, Desdemona told me. The Brotherhood treats them as abominations. Both positions assume that humanity has the right to determine the value of other thinking beings. But who gave us that right? We're just fighting for the obvious truth: slavery is wrong, period. The railroad didn't want power. They didn't want to build a new government or control territory. They just wanted to free people or beings or whatever you wanted to call synths from bondage. They were willing to die for individuals they'd never meet, for no reward except knowing they'd helped someone escape. When I helped Yes Man secure an independent New Vegas free from House, NCR, and Legion control, I understood why. It terrified every other faction. It rejected all their sacred hierarchies. No autocrat, no republic, no empire, no corporate overlord. Just communities working together or not, by choice. Messy, chaotic, uncertain, but free. The major factions called it anarchy. They said it would collapse into violence and tribal warfare. But I watched New Vegas thrive under independence, and you know what I saw? People solving their own problems, communities helping each other because it was mutually beneficial, not because some authority demanded it. Was it perfect? No, but it wasn't trying to rebuild the systems that ended the world. What keeps me up at night isn't the radiation or the raiders or the super mutants. It's watching people rally behind flags that represent the same governments, corporations, and empires that chose to end the world rather than change. I've stood in the ruins of Washington, D.C., where the Brotherhood now rules from the Citadel. I've walked through the Institute's sterile corridors beneath the Commonwealth. I've seen Caesar's Legion crucify dissidents along Highway 95. I've watched Enclave soldiers execute families for genetic impurity. I've heard Mr. House's cold calculations about acceptable losses. Every single one of them believes they're saving humanity. Every single one of them has a logical explanation for why their atrocities are necessary. Every single one of them thinks they've learned from the past while repeating it exactly. The Enclave officer who ordered that settlement massacre truly believed he was purifying humanity for its own good. The Institute scientist who showed me Swan's notes genuinely thought the suffering was justified by the scientific advancement. Elder Maxon sincerely believes hoarding technology protects people from themselves. Caesar actually thinks he's building a stable civilization through slavery and conquest. Mr. House honestly believes autocratic control is the only path to humanity's survival. They're not lying. That's what makes it so terrifying. They believe their own propaganda. I found a holotape once, in the ruins of a pre-war government building. A meeting recording from 6 months before the bombs fell. Officials discussing resource allocation, military options, the growing tension with China. One voice, I'll never forget it, said, "If we can't have the future we want, no one should." That's the mentality that ended the world, and that's the mentality I see in every major faction fighting for control of the Wasteland. The Enclave. If everyone can't be pure, they don't deserve to live. The Institute. If surface dwellers can't match our advancement, they're inferior. The Brotherhood. If people can't be trusted with technology, we'll keep it from them. Caesar's Legion. If cultures won't submit to unity, we'll erase them. Mr. House, if humanity won't follow my vision, I'll force them to. The same logic, the same assumption that they have the right to determine everyone else's fate, the same belief that their ends justify any means. Every major faction's solution to the Wasteland is just a different variation of the pre-war status quo, authoritarianism, technocracy, imperialism, or corporate autocracy. They're not trying to build something new. They're trying to resurrect the corpses of dead civilizations and puppet them around the Wasteland. Meanwhile, the only factions that understand the truth are the ones every civilization builder dismisses as naive idealists or dangerous anarchists, the followers of the apocalypse, teaching people to think critically about power, the railroad, fighting for individual freedom over systemic control, the independent settlements trying to govern themselves without bowing to empires. I met a woman in Good Springs once, a town that refused to join the NCR or submit to the Legion or accept Mr. House's protection. She was old, probably born before the war, though she never confirmed it. She just smiled when I asked, "You know what all these factions have in common?" she said, sitting on her porch watching the sunset. "They're all terrified of the same thing." "What's that?" I asked. "That people might figure out they don't need them." If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. I started documenting everything after that conversation, recording terminal entries, taking holotapes, copying files, building evidence. Because I realized something important: the factions don't want you to know the truth about where they came from or what they really represent. The Enclave doesn't advertise that they were the shadow government that helped cause the war. The Institute doesn't mention the thousands of Commonwealth citizens they kidnapped and mutated. The Brotherhood doesn't talk about how Roger Maxon's original vision was to help people, not control them. Caesar doesn't tell his legion that he's just an educated man from the followers play-acting Roman emperor. Mr. House doesn't mention that he was in that room with Vault-Tec executives planning the apocalypse. They control the narrative. They write the history. They decide what people learn about the past. But I've seen the evidence. I've read the terminals they thought were wiped. I've heard the holotapes they thought were destroyed. I know the truth about what they are and what they want. And the truth is this: they're selling you the apocalypse that already happened, just with a fresh coat of paint and a new logo. The real turning point came when I found the Vault-Tec headquarters. I'd been tracking pre-war corporate connections, trying to understand how everything fit together, how the government, the military, the corporations all collaborated to create the systems that ended the world. The trail led me to a partially collapsed building in the Commonwealth, buried under rubble and forgotten by everyone except the ghouls who'd made it their tomb. Inside, I found the meeting records, the actual files from the executive meetings where Vault-Tec, Robco, Westtech, Poseidon Energy, and others sat down with Enclave representatives to plan the Vault experiments. They knew the war was coming. Some of them helped ensure it would happen, and they used that foreknowledge to set up the most comprehensive human experimentation program in history, Vault 11, where residents had to sacrifice one person annually, or everyone would die a psychological experiment in democracy under duress. Vault 27, deliberately overcrowded to study stress and violence. Vault 77, where one man was surrounded by puppets to study isolation and insanity. Vault 92, where white noise drove people to murder. Vault 106, where psychoactive drugs were pumped through the air. The files were clinical, detached, expected mortality rate 70 to 90%, acceptable for data acquisition. They weren't trying to save humanity. They were using the apocalypse as an opportunity for unlimited experimentation without ethical oversight. The vaults were never meant to protect people. They were laboratories, and the corporations that built them, the government that authorized them, the shadow state that funded them, they all became the Enclave. The same people who experimented on vault dwellers before the war are now trying to purify humanity after it. The same corporate logic that turned human lives into data points is what drives the Institute's research. The same military mindset that created the FEV is what the Brotherhood uses to justify controlling technology. It's not a coincidence, it's a direct line of causation. I started connecting more dots after that, started seeing how the major factions weren't just philosophically similar to pre-war power structures, they were literally descended from them, or explicitly trying to recreate them. The Brotherhood of Steel was founded by United States military personnel from Mariposa Base. They witnessed the FEV experiments firsthand, rebelled against their own government, and declared independence. Roger Maxon's original vision was noble use military training and discipline to protect people and preserve knowledge. But within a generation, they'd become exactly what they opposed: an authoritarian military organization hoarding technology and power. I found a holotape from John Maxon, Roger's son, recorded in 2140. He was already moving away from his father's ideals. "We can't afford to share our technology with outsiders," he said. "They'll only destroy themselves with it, like the old world did. We must be the guardians." But guardians of what? For whom? By 2280, the Brotherhood had become gatekeepers who demanded tribute from settlements, confiscated technology by force, and eliminated anyone who threatened their monopoly. They'd gone from rebels against military abuse of power to enforcers of military control over technology. The same pattern, the same corruption, the same transformation from idealism to authoritarianism. Caesar's Legion was even more explicit in its resurrection of failed systems. Edward Sallow literally read books about ancient Rome and decided to rebuild it in the Mojave. But he didn't understand Rome. Not really. He understood conquest. He understood spectacle. He understood how to use symbols and mythology to control people. Real Rome was complex. Yes, it was an empire built on slavery and military might, but it was also a republic With senators and laws and civic institutions, it adapted conquered cultures, integrated them, allowed them to keep their identities as long as they paid taxes and acknowledged Roman authority. That adaptability, that cultural flexibility, was part of what made Rome powerful. Caesar eliminated all of that. He kept only the worst parts, the slavery, the conquest, the crucifixions, and wrapped them in Latin words his soldiers couldn't even read. He banned technology to keep people dependent. He erased cultures to prevent unity against him. He created a personality cult because he knew his empire would collapse the moment he died. And he called it synthesis. He called it progress. He called it the future. I met a former legionnaire once, a man who'd escaped and made it to NCR territory. He was missing 3 fingers, cut off as punishment for questioning an order. He told me about life in the Legion, about the constant violence and arbitrary rules, about watching his sister sold into slavery because Caesar's law said women were property. I believed him, the former legionnaire said, staring at his mutilated hand. I believed we were building something better. He said the old world was weak, that democracy made people soft, that only strength mattered. It made sense when I was young and angry and hungry for purpose. What changed? I asked. I realized he was just another warlord using fancy words. There were raiders east of the Colorado before Caesar. After Caesar, there were just raiders wearing football pads and speaking broken Latin. Same violence, same slavery, different costume. That's what all these factions are. Different costumes over the same disease. Here's something I want you to think about. If someone offered you safety and order in exchange for giving up your freedom to choose, would you take it? Because that's what every major faction is offering. They promise security, structure, advancement, but the price is always your autonomy. Is it worth it? The Institute might be the most insidious of all the major factions because their evil is so clean and well-reasoned. They don't see themselves as monsters. They see themselves as scientists, researchers, the inheritors of human knowledge and advancement. They live in a pre-war facility with working lights and clean water and advanced technology. They've preserved so much, but they've also lost everything that matters. I spoke with a scientist there, Dr. Ayo from the Synth Retention Bureau. He explained their philosophy over lunch in their pristine cafeteria. Surface dwellers are trapped in cycles of violence and ignorance, he said. We represent humanity's future ordered, rational, scientific. Yes, our methods seem harsh from the outside, but we're playing the long game. We're ensuring that human knowledge survives. What about the people you kidnap? I asked. The ones you expose to Fev? The ones you replace with synths? He didn't even flinch. Necessary for our research, the surface is contaminated anyway. Radiation damage makes most of them unsuitable for our purposes, so we use them for experiments that advance our understanding. It's unfortunate, but every scientific breakthrough requires sacrifice. That word, sacrifice. Like he was talking about lab rats, not people. The Institute killed or replaced entire settlement leaders to destabilize surface communities. They dumped super mutants into the Commonwealth for decades, creating terror and instability that prevented people from organizing. They sabotaged the Commonwealth provisional government when surface settlements tried to form their own democracy, all to keep the surface weak, divided, dependent. Why? Because a united surface would threaten Institute control. A thriving surface would prove that the Institute's isolation wasn't necessary. A successful surface government would challenge the Institute's narrative that they're humanity's only hope. They need the surface to fail. They need people to suffer, because if the Wasteland rebuilt itself without them, it would prove the Institute was never necessary in the first place. I found evidence of this in Father's personal terminal, a memo from 2073 discussing the Provisional Government Massacre. Surface unity represents an unacceptable threat to long-term plans. Recommend immediate action to prevent organized resistance to future Institute operations. They murdered representatives from multiple settlements, people who'd come together to try to build something, because those people dared to organize without Institute permission. and father, who turned out to be Sean, my own son. In one version of events I heard about, he defended this decision, said it was necessary for the Institute's survival, said the surface couldn't be trusted to govern itself. The same logic every authoritarian uses. People can't handle freedom, they need us to control them for their own good. Mr. House used the exact same reasoning in New Vegas. When I questioned why he kept Freeside impoverished while the Strip thrived, he pulled up his probability matrices. "Observe," he said, showing me calculations. "If I distributed Strip wealth evenly across Freeside, economic models predict collapse within 2 years. The population lacks the education and infrastructure to manage sudden wealth. Poverty is unfortunate, but it's a necessary variable in the stability equation. Once I've secured the Mojave and eliminated NCR and Legion threats, I can begin gradual improvements, but not before. Order must precede prosperity." Translation: let them starve until I'm powerful enough that their suffering doesn't threaten my control. He had food, he had medicine, he had resources. He chose to withhold them because his mathematical models said helping people was inefficient until after he'd consolidated power. The same corporate logic that led Robco and other companies to prioritize profit over sustainable energy research before the war. The same calculation that made nuclear weapons preferable to sharing resources. Another question for you: when does pragmatism become evil? These factions all claim their cruelty is practical, necessary, calculated for the greater good. But at what point does the ends justify the means become just another excuse for atrocity? Where's the line? The NCR is slightly different because they're not as overtly authoritarian as the others. They have elections, Congress, a justice system. They look like a republic, but I watched them operate, and underneath the democratic structure was the same imperial logic as pre-war America. I was in a settlement when NCR troops arrived to negotiate joining the republic. The negotiations went like this: you can join voluntarily and pay 20% taxes, or we'll classify you as hostile territory and you'll lose access to NCR trade routes and protection, which means raiders and Legion will overrun you within a month. It wasn't a negotiation, it was extortion with paperwork. The NCR expands because it needs resources to sustain itself. It needs resources because it keeps expanding. It's a feedback loop that requires constant conquest to avoid collapse. The same imperial overreach that destroyed every empire in history. The same logic that led pre-war America into the resource wars and eventually the Great War. President Kimball's speeches sounded exactly like pre-war American politicians. Manifest destiny, bringing civilization, protecting democracy, the same words used to justify every invasion and exploitation in history. I met NCR soldiers who genuinely believed they were helping people, who thought they were the good guys. They'd grown up in stable NCR cities with schools and laws and relative safety. They couldn't see that their prosperity was built on extracting resources from frontier territories. They couldn't see that they were becoming an empire. "We're not like Caesar," one ranger told me. "We give people choice. We bring law and order. We're rebuilding civilization." But the farmers they taxed into poverty didn't feel like they had much choice. The settlements they pressured into joining didn't feel very free. The tribal lands they annexed didn't feel particularly civilized. The NCR was better than the Legion, better than the Enclave, better than the Institute. But better wasn't the same as good. It was still built on the assumption that expansion equals progress, that manifest destiny justifies subordination, that democracy means everyone gets to vote on who controls them. I spent time with the followers of the apocalypse after seeing all this. Helped them run medical clinics, taught classes on pre-war history, tried to make sense of what I'd learned. Arcade Gannon became something like a friend during those months. We'd sit up late going through pre-war documents, trying to understand how humanity had failed so completely. "Every faction with power is obsessed with control," Arcady said one night. The Enclave wants genetic control. The Institute wants scientific control. The Brotherhood wants technological control. Caesar wants cultural control. House wants economic control. Even the NCR wants territorial control. They all think control equals safety, that if they can just manage every variable, they can prevent another apocalypse. What's the alternative? I asked. Trust, Arcady said. Trust that people can solve their own problems. Trust that communities can organize without overlords. Trust that freedom is worth the risk of failure. The followers don't try to control anyone. We just offer education, medicine, support. We trust people to use knowledge wisely, and if they don't, Arcade smiled sadly. Then they fail on their own terms, not because someone in power decided their fate for them. At least then, they own their choices. That conversation changed how I saw everything. The major factions were all trying to prevent failure through control, but control was what caused the failure in the first place. Pre-war America collapsed because too much power concentrated in too few hands, because corporations prioritized profit over sustainability, because government prioritized order over freedom, because military prioritized weapons over peace, and now every major faction was trying to rebuild some version of that concentrated power. They'd all learned the wrong lesson from the apocalypse. The real test of the Wasteland isn't whether we can resurrect the old world's power structures. It's whether we can resist the seductive comfort of recreating the same systems that failed us. Whether we're brave enough to try something actually new instead of just putting fresh paint on old tyranny. Maybe that's the real test of the Wasteland, whether we can resist the seductive comfort of recreating the same systems that failed us, or whether we're doomed to build the next apocalypse with better paint. I've been documenting everything for 3 years now. Every conversation, every terminal entry, every piece of evidence showing how the major factions are just resurrections of pre-war failures. I've hidden copies in dead drops across the Wasteland, encrypted holotapes in places only the followers know about. If they kill me, the information survives, and they are looking for me. I know this because I've seen the pattern change. The Enclave has coursers asking about someone matching my description. The Institute has synths infiltrating settlements where I've been. The Brotherhood sent paladins to a safe house I used 2 months ago. I barely got out. Caesar's Legion put a bounty on the historian, which is what they call me now. Even Mr. House has Securitrons searching for someone who possesses dangerous ideological materials. They're coordinated. They're cooperating. Factions that should be enemies are working together to silence me. That tells you everything you need to know about what they really fear. They don't fear each other. They fear the truth. Because if people understood what these factions really are, if people saw the direct line connecting pre-war power structures to post-war authoritarianism, if people realized they were being sold the same systems that ended the world, they might refuse to buy it. And that terrifies every faction with power. I met someone recently who reminded me why this matters. A young woman in the Commonwealth, couldn't have been more than 20. She'd been saved by railroad agents after the Institute replaced her father with a synth and killed the original. She was angry, traumatized, looking for meaning in the violence. A Brotherhood knight found her first, offered her a place in their ranks, purpose, structure, a chance to fight the Institute and prevent it from hurting anyone else. She was going to join. She wanted revenge, and the Brotherhood was offering it wrapped in righteous purpose. I showed her the documents, showed her how the Brotherhood was founded by military personnel who'd witnessed FEV experiments, how they'd originally opposed government abuse of power, how they'd gradually become exactly what they opposed. Showed her Roger Maxon's original vision compared to Arthur Maxon's current policies. They're not fighting the Institute because it's evil, I told her. They're fighting it because it's competition, because the Institute has technology the Brotherhood wants to control. If the Brotherhood destroys the Institute, they'll just take its place as the faction controlling advanced technology and treating everyone else as inferior. She didn't want to believe me. Nobody wants to believe that the people offering salvation are just selling damnation in a different package. But she read the documents, spent 2 days going through everything I'd collected, and then she made a choice. She joined the Minutemen instead, a loose confederation of settlements helping each other without centralized authority, without grand ideology, without promises of paradise. Just people trying to survive and protect each other. It's not as exciting as the Brotherhood, she told me. No power armor, no airship, no grand speeches about humanity's destiny. But at least I know I'm not joining another group trying to rebuild the systems that killed my father's world. That's my third question for you. If you had to choose today, right now, which faction would you join? Knowing what they really are, knowing where they came from, knowing what they want to build, which one represents the future you want to live in? Or would you walk away from all of them? I think about that choice constantly now, because I'm running out of places to hide and I know eventually they'll find me. The Enclave wants me dead because I know they're war criminals pretending to be saviors. The Institute wants me silenced because I've documented their century of atrocities. The Brotherhood wants me eliminated because I've proven they've abandoned their founding principles. Caesar wants me crucified because I've shown his legion that their god emperor is just an educated man play-acting history. Mr. House wants me erased because I've calculated the human cost of his probability matrices. They all want the same thing: control over the narrative, control over what people know about the past, control over what future people are allowed to imagine. And the terrifying thing? They're winning. Most people in the Wasteland don't know the Enclave used to be the shadow government that helped cause the war. Most don't know the Institute has been dumping super mutants on the Commonwealth for a century. Most don't know the Brotherhood started as rebels against military authority. Most don't know Caesar is just copying books he read. Most don't know Mr. House sat in meetings with Vault-Tec executives planning human experiments. The factions control the information. They write the histories. They decide what people learn. And without that knowledge, people keep making the same choices, keep rallying behind the same flags, keep rebuilding the same systems that failed before. I've watched it happen dozens of times. Good people, smart people, people who want to make the world better, they join the Brotherhood, or the NCR, or even the Legion, because they don't know the full story. They see the surface, the organization, the strength, the promises, and they think this time will be different. But it's never different. The structure shapes the outcome. Authoritarian systems produce authoritarian results. Imperial systems produce imperial consequences. Corporate systems produce corporate exploitation every single time. There are exceptions, small ones, the followers of the apocalypse, genuinely trying to educate without controlling, the railroad, fighting for individual freedom without demanding power, independent settlements working together voluntarily, the Minutemen in the Commonwealth, organizing for mutual defense without central authority. But these groups are small, underfunded, constantly under threat from the major factions, because the major factions can't allow them to succeed. If the followers prove that education works better than control, if the railroad proved that freedom matters more than order, if independent settlements prove that people can organize without overlords, it delegitimizes everything the major factions claim. The Enclave claims purity is necessary, but the followers accept everyone and thrive. The Institute claims surface dwellers are inferior, but independent settlements keep surviving. The Brotherhood claims technology must be controlled, but communities share knowledge and prosper. Caesar claims totalitarian unity is strength, but free people keep resisting. Mr. House claims autocracy is efficient, but voluntary cooperation keeps working. The major factions need the alternatives to fail. They need the followers to be dismissed as naive. They need the railroad to be crushed as terrorist. They need independent settlements to collapse into chaos. Because if these alternatives succeed, it proves the major factions were never necessary. I understand now why pre-war America ended the world rather than change. The people in power couldn't admit that their system was failing, couldn't accept that corporate capitalism plus military imperialism plus government authoritarianism was unsustainable. They had two choices: fundamentally restructure society or destroy it. They chose destruction because at least that way they could imagine themselves as victims of circumstance rather than architects of catastrophe. And now their descendants, literally and philosophically, are making the same choice. The Enclave would rather kill everyone than admit genetic purity is meaningless. The Institute would rather stay underground forever than acknowledge surface dwellers as equals. The Brotherhood would rather hoard technology until it rusts than share knowledge freely. Caesar would rather build an empire of slaves than admit his philosophy is borrowed and broken. Mr. House would rather rule a wasteland eternally than share power democratically. They'd all rather double down on failed systems than try something new. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. I'm recording this in an abandoned relay tower north of the Commonwealth. I can see the Pridwin in the distance, the Brotherhood's airship. Below me, Institute synths are sweeping the area. To the west, I spotted Enclave vertibirds yesterday. They're closing in, all of them, working together to find me. I've already uploaded copies of everything to follower safe houses, railroad dead drops, and hidden terminals across 5 territories. Even if they kill me tonight, the information survives. People will find it. People will learn the truth about what these factions really are. But I need you to understand something crucial, whoever finds this recording. The factions aren't the real enemy. The systems are. The Enclave isn't evil because individual officers are monsters. It's evil because authoritarian purity systems inevitably produce monstrous results. The Institute isn't wrong because scientists are cruel. It's wrong because scientific systems without ethics always justify atrocities. The Brotherhood isn't corrupt because Elder Maxon is a tyrant. It's corrupt because military control of technology inherently becomes tyranny. You can kill every Enclave soldier, destroy every Institute synth, defeat every Brotherhood paladin, crucify every Legion centurion, unplug Mr. House himself, and if you rebuild the same systems, you'll get the same results within a generation. That's the lesson nobody wants to learn. That's the truth every faction with power tries to hide. The apocalypse wasn't an accident. It wasn't just the war. The war was the inevitable conclusion of systems designed to concentrate power, extract resources, subordinate people, and prioritize control over cooperation. You can't take those systems, give them a new name and a fresh coat of paint, and expect different outcomes. The only way forward is actually forward, not backward to imagined golden ages that never existed, not sideways to slightly modified versions of the same hierarchies, forward to something genuinely new. What does that look like? I don't know exactly. Nobody does. That's the point. It has to be discovered through experimentation, through trial and error, through people working together voluntarily to solve problems instead of being forced into predetermined structures. Maybe it looks like the followers model education and mutual aid without authority. Maybe it looks like the railroad philosophy, individual freedom as the highest value. Maybe it looks like the independent settlements, voluntary cooperation without central control. Maybe it's something nobody's imagined yet, but I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like the Enclave's purity doctrine or the Institute's scientific autocracy or the Brotherhood's technological gatekeeping or Caesar's totalitarian empire or Mr. House's corporate dictatorship or even the NCR's democratic imperialism. It doesn't look like any system that requires some people to have power over others. Here's my final question, the one that matters most. What are you willing to risk for freedom? Real freedom, not the illusion of choice within predetermined systems, not the freedom to pick which authority controls you, the freedom to build something actually new, even knowing it might fail. Are you brave enough for that? The lights just went out in the valley below. That means they've found my position. They'll be here soon. Brotherhood, Institute, maybe both. I've got maybe an hour before they breach this tower. I'm not afraid of dying. I've lived long enough in this wasteland to know that death is the only certainty. What terrifies me is the thought that humanity might keep making the same mistakes forever, that we'll keep rebuilding the same systems, keep trusting the same promises, keep following the same flags into the same disasters. That 200 years after the bombs fell, we still haven't learned that the systems that ended the world can't be the systems that save it. The followers taught me something important in my time with them. They have this saying, the world tends toward destruction, so we try to make a difference. Not, we will fix everything or we have all the answers or follow us to salvation, just trying to make a difference, one person at a time, one choice at a time. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Refuse to join the factions resurrecting failure. Refuse to accept that concentrated power is necessary. Refuse to believe that someone else should control your fate. And then try, in whatever small way possible, to build something better. I hear footsteps on the stairs now. Multiple sets, power armor from the sound of it, Brotherhood then, or Enclave or both. This is probably my last recording, but if you're hearing this, it means the information survived. It means you know the truth about what these factions really are and what they're really trying to build. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. You can join them anyway. Lots of people do. The comfort of structure, the promise of safety, the satisfaction of belonging to something bigger than yourself, these are powerful motivations. I don't judge anyone who makes that choice. Survival matters. But at least now you'll know what you're joining. You'll understand that when the Enclave talks about purity, they mean genocide. When the Institute talks about advancement, they mean exploitation. When the Brotherhood talks about protection, they mean control. When Caesar talks about civilization, he means slavery. When Mr. House talks about vision, he means autocracy. You'll know that these aren't paths forward, they're paths backward. Circular routes that lead right back to the cliff humanity already fell off. And maybe, just maybe, knowing that will help you choose differently. The door is opening now. I can see their lights. Hope isn't dying in the wasteland because of radiation or raiders. It's being murdered by men in power armor who think they can resurrect the corpse of America and call it progress. But hope doesn't die as long as someone remembers the truth. Remember,